Welcome back to the Brand Builder Academy podcast, where we discuss content marketing best practices and latest trends. This podcast is powered by Brand Method Media Group, and I'm your host, Kelly Kelly. Today's guest is Hamlet Azarian, CEO and founder of Azarian Growth Agency, and they focus on helping growth-minded leaders achieve their vision through agile, data-driven, and creative marketing strategies. Welcome to the show, Hamlet.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm honored to be here and look forward to having a productive conversation.
Wonderful. So let's kick things off with maybe a quick overview of you and your company.
Sure. I've been doing marketing for a little over 12 years or so, predominantly initially focused on working with early stage startups. So these are startups that haven't raised a lot of money, honestly. So if as a marketer, probably the worst area you could go in, there's no capital, there's no money, there's nothing. So what are you supposed to do? So I've been focused in that space, and I've been doing that for a little about 10 or 12 years, and proactively, either through luck or skill, I'm not quite sure which one. I like to think more skill, but sometimes obviously luck plays into it. I've been able to help these startups scale from this early infancy stage to what they have become today. One of them almost went publicly traded last year. Another one became close to a unicorn, and another one has become a multinational startup that has offices in basically LA, Mexico City, as well as Colombia. In the process of that, we then began the agency, and that's what we do.
That's awesome. So through some research, I noticed a term coming up that I want to address this and maybe get clarity on what it is and what it's not. Just for anyone listening who isn't clear, what exactly is growth hacking? It's kind of a popular term, but I kind of think it's maybe gone into some other areas, and it's not exactly what it sounds like.
Great question. I personally don't like that phrase and how it positions what the process it really is, right? So early on, it was called as growth hacking because there was a gentleman named Sean Ellis who crafted a book, and that was just the book's title, and people gravitated towards that. But what that book was really talking about was the process. And what the process was really centered on was an experimentation process that allowed you to run multiple different campaigns or experiments per se. And through raw data, you were able to quickly learn and understand what the value propositions that would work for your target audience. And from that, you were able to start systemizing and being able to put campaigns together that would actually be effective and would drive results. The good and the bad news of growth hacking is 90% of the time you fail. Like it doesn't even work, but that's not the point. The point is really the lessons that you're actually learning, right? So like as you're running the data, you're trying this experiment, you might have a theory, you might have a hypothesis. When it actually doesn't work, why didn't it work? And that constant why is what eventually leads you down to a successful experiment. And then from that, you're able to build upon it. And then you eventually find what's known as a growth engine. And then with that growth engine, you're able to start scaling and growing your business.
So when it comes to this strategy, what are some common mistakes companies make when they're attempting to implement this?
They start running experiments that cause confounding issues. So meaning that they might run experiment A and experiment B, but they overlap each other. And they don't realize the experiment B is causing the data within experiment A to not be relevant or accurate. Or while they're setting up the experiment, the things that they're testing are not wide enough. So for example, what do I mean by that? So you might run a Facebook ad per se, and you might be thinking, hey, I'm running a really, really good experiment right now. But the reality of what you're doing is you're just taking one value proposition and you're just changing something little. You're changing like, oh, the headline. Oh, look, it's a great experiment. That's not the essence and the point. The point is you're supposed to be testing multiple value propositions, and you're supposed to be very opposite of each other so that you could have clear winners, and you can from that point on be able to go further, deeper into that and start digging more and more. The other element that people also make mistakes on is they start at the wrong place. So people might, if you look at a funnel, you have the top of the funnel, which is awareness. Then you have the secondary part of the funnel, which is acquisition. Then you have a tertiary part, which is activation. Then you have retention, revenue, and referral. That's the full funnel that we look at. People might begin at, let's say, the bottom of the funnel when there isn't enough people there yet. So this experiment's going to take years. Like, what are you doing? Why are you trying to run an experiment here? Work on whether you actually have people there and sample size so you can actually learn from something. So I always suggest start at the top. We don't necessarily start at awareness, but we start a little bit lower. And then from that point on, start building down as you start understanding a journey fully from the beginning to end.
Now, I think that provides a lot of clarity. And to your point, I think overall in marketing, I'm sure you've seen throughout your career, everybody wants to start at that bottom. And I'm like, we got to start here. We got to get a foundation. Otherwise, anything that we're doing is probably not going to be very beneficial. So this process of experimentation and is this to lay groundwork and then you move on, or is this something that should be ongoing throughout a company?
Ongoing, yeah, great question. Okay. So what this process is if you think of it as a flywheel, right? Like a big giant flywheel. If you were at a farm, you would see it like spinning over and over and over again. Your goal is to build this process or this momentum. So you start going through the experimentation process a lot quicker and faster. And it tends to happen as you continue to grow and scale, and you're able to run multiple experiments. You're able to, as the team develops as a whole, you're able to quickly go through it. And you're also able to take historical experiments you ran and be able to understand that what you've done, what works and what doesn't work, and be able to apply it, right? So where does it all start? Like you're like, yeah, I'm like, great, I have a flywheel. What does that mean? So where does it really start is you look at the data. So you start actually looking at the raw data and the raw stats you have within your platforms, whatever it might be. It might be Facebook, it might be Google, it might be your CRM, it might be Google Analytics. Wherever you are, you look at the raw data that you have and you start building questions or observations. You'll be like, why is this happening? Like, why is there a giant drop off on this landing page? What could be wrong with this page, right? So as these questions come to fruition for you, and that's the best part, is you have hundreds of questions that as you start doing more and more of this, you start building a hypothesis. So you start saying, hey, what if I change this? What if I move my lead form from the bottom of the page to the top of the page? What if I change my first headline when users come here and actually speak to them and personalize it to them? What if I add some trust symbols right above the fold so people can see other people or other places that have written about us? So it might be publication or news or something. What if I take a customer success story and I make that the landing page? You land and here's a customer talking to you about their experience with us. It's authentic, it's truthful, it's not edited, it's raw. Will these things improve my overall conversion rate? So as these questions come, then you start testing them, right? So then you run different experiments. You have to have the tools. So you'll be using Google Optimize, or you'll be using VWO, and you'll be splitting the traffic. And then you need to get to a raw sample size. So once you get to that component, then you start seeing which one's working. You get to a confidence interval. And I'm throwing a lot of terminology here, so feel free to interrupt. And you're able to statistically determine if something is working or not working. Again, as I said earlier, most of the time they don't work, right? But your question gets answered. You now know that, hey, doing this change or doing this modification did not work today. So then you start documenting it and then you store it. It doesn't mean it won't work in the future, but it just didn't work today. But when there is a clear winner, you systemize it. So you basically say, oh, wow, this really worked. I want all my traffic to start going here now. Now let me move on to the next stage of the funnel. And then you go through this iterative cycle over and over and over again. And as you start moving faster, then you start growing.
Are there best practices for harnessing the what ifs? I mean, people can what if all day. Is there a best practice operation wise or planning wise or strategy wise, where we say, okay, this is what we're going to work with. We're going to work with this set of what ifs for now, and then maybe move on to, is there a certain process for that, or is it just individual to the organization?
So it's very customized, but it all stems from all the common things we've learned throughout our careers in marketing, right? So who's the customer? Who are we actually targeting and what are we going after? What is the main problem that that customer has that you're solving with your service, your product, whatever it might be, right? How is your product unique? So how are you different than everybody else in the marketplace? And what is really your value proposition? So those are the core of what we start with, right?
Okay.
And then we will then begin doing what we call competitive research, which we all do in marketing, but we use different tools and we're able to gather, at least digitally, exactly what your competition is doing. And then from that, that becomes your cornerstone or library of raw data that you have. And then throughout that, you, as I mentioned earlier, you begin from the top. You're like, all right, so how do I position my business? How do I get my value proposition out that can begin the awareness and acquisition cycle? So can I get a high click-through rate on the ads that I'm running? And is the traffic that's landing on my page engaging with my landing page? Am I starting to get actual leads, or am I starting to get actual some sort of engagement happening on the website? And then from that point on, then you begin optimizing that component, which is acquisition. So it's not really best practices. It's more like a process per se. And if you begin with that top or the foundation, you're able to quickly start going down the funnel. There's different things in each model, right? So Facebook ads have unique things that make them special. Google ads have unique things that make them special. Cold email has something that makes it special. Affiliate or partnership marketing has something that makes it special. Webinars do have a different way of running campaigns, or even podcasts. You being a guest on podcasts, there's a certain way of doing that, right? So all of these different channels or tactics have their own best practices per se. But foundationally, if we're talking about like growth, experimentation, not hacking, right? There is this kind of overarching way of you build a foundation first, you keep your customers in mind, and from there you're able to kind of iterate quickly and figure out exactly what makes sense for you to run experiments.
Okay, that makes sense. Can growth experimentation be used for non-technical companies?
Yes.
Okay.
We do it all the time. So at least today, where it stands, it's not like, hey, you have to be a venture-backed startup to do growth experimentations, right? So it's really just a methodology. And the tools of the trade per se are just any other, as long as you're doing digital marketing, you can implement growth experimentation into your overall process. Think of it more as like, this is going to make you laugh, because like my son this year, he had to do his third grade science fair, right? So he was totally excited. And, you know, I'm not a scientist by trade. I never really paid attention to science class when I was growing up. My wife, however, on the other hand, that's her path she took. So she was totally excited. She's like, yeah, we're going to do science. She was like rooting and hawing and cheering. But you know, nature or God had something else in store for her. She was pregnant, so she was at the tail end of her pregnancy.
Oh my goodness!
So she couldn't do this. She's like, Hamlet, I can't do this. You got to take over. You got to jump in. So I'm like, all right, let me see what all this is about. So as I started going through the third grade science fair, I'm like, holy moly, this is growth. This is growth experimentation. It was like literally the same thing. I was like, all right, we're going to gather data. Oh, we're going to come up with a hypothesis. Oh, we're going to run an experiment. So as I was going through this with him and then we finished, he's like, Dad, you do this so well. And then I'm like, hon, this is what I do every day.
This is my lane. This is what I do. Okay, so what is one practical growth experimentation that a B2B SaaS company could implement or work on as a starter? What's one? Because the goal of also part of this podcast, we want to provide an action item someone can listen to and take today. It doesn't mean that they solve all of their marketing problems, but it's something that they can take action on today. So within your lane and your expertise, what is one practical starter growth experimentation strategy a company can take today?
Okay. So the first thing I would be asking this company, and because it'll go two ways, right? Is what does the sales cycle look like? So is the sales cycle a low ticket, sort of more like in tune to a B2C sign up? So any user can come on, there's not a lot of like friction for them to think about it. They can personally go and check out, and they can sign up quickly or try it or whatever it might be. That lane has different experiments that make sense for it. And if the sales cycle, let's say, is much higher, it's a bigger ticket, multiple people have to make a decision on it. It's sort of like an infrastructure decision that will go through 2 or 3 rounds of meetings. That process might be totally different. So I'll give you examples in both. Okay.
Sure.
So on the smaller or faster, let's say, sales cycle kind of path, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get users into the product as quickly as possible. And you want them to get to what's known as the aha moment, where they realize how your product is really, really different than anything else in the marketplace. And you got to make it as frictionless as possible. So you first have to define what that aha moment is. And let's use, for example, a product like Slack, right? So most people, before Slack existed, what were they doing? They were sending emails. They were waiting forever to get a response back from somebody. They weren't even sure if they got the email. And then they were sitting around going, man, is this ever going to get answered or what? And then they were like, all right, let me just text them. So then they were texting and saying, hey, I sent you an email. Can you respond to my email? So that was the world before Slack. So when Slack came around, they're like, all right, let's get you to the aha moment as fast as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to create these notifications. So when you log in, you're going to get a, and then you're going to see a little notification icon. You're going to be able to upload files. You're going to be able to create threads. You're going to be able to do all of this really, really quickly. It doesn't take that long to get into the aha moment. Once you're in there, you're like, wow, this is so much better. This is so much more organized. I can really, really make use of this. So let me start inviting all my friends. So they started making it really easy for you to do that. They're like, hey, invite your coworkers. You can easily do that. You could just go into this button and list the whole list. Or better yet, everyone with this domain has access to it. Just send them a message. So that was their model, right? So, hey, you get you to the aha moment. You realize, wow, this is really, really cool. I need to tell the whole world about it, because the more people I get into it, the better the product experience for me will be. So now let's move on to the next. Let's go to a B2B version, longer ticket sales, a longer process. So what do you do then? So here, this is all about trust. So how do you get a company to believe, trust, know that you can continuously deliver this big ticket purchase that they're about to do, and they're able to rely upon you because it's a major decision for them. They're about to change the infrastructure for their organization. They're about to do something different, right? So a company like this could be potentially like Jira, or another company like this could be, the ones that have lots of subscribers on it. So, a Slack, or not Slack, Asana, right? So this is like a whole new process or place you're going to be putting. So what do they focus on? They might be focusing on webinars where they're educating you on workflow management, or they're educating you on how you can solve this pain without them, how the world exists without them, and how would it exist with their product in place. So they also are they don't rush you into the decision. So they will be much more methodical. So if you think about like a Salesforce sales cycle, right? Like Salesforce will have an introductory call for it with you. They will literally listen to what you are trying to do and why you're trying to do it. They don't even sell you. They just ask you questions. They spend, an hour. It's like sort of like an introductory call, right? So they're asking you questions. What are your usages? What are your utilities? What are you going to be doing with this? Then they come back and they present what their findings are based off of the answers that they've said. And they might even tell you, they might say, hey, you're not ready for us, which is kind of interesting sometimes that they do that, right? You're like, hey, we can sell you this. This is like our early version, but do you really want this? There's other tools out there that could probably solve your pain point. But if you are ready, then they'll tell you, they're like, okay, yeah, these are the different things we can do. This is the best way we should be implementing it. And we can also give you someone who's a specialist in this, and they're going to sell you that too, that can help you implement it if you don't know how to implement it. Oh, by the way, we have these other tools that that can solve some of the other pain points that you said. So all of a sudden you went and you're like, man, I just wanted to get Salesforce. Now I'm getting Pardot. I'm getting these other things. I'm getting a consultant. How did that happen? Well, but you're in. You're like, you believe them and you trust them because you know that they're best in class and you know that they will solve the problem for you. So that's the difference, right? So one is much more nurtured with actual people and actual sales teams and collateral and marketing plays in that, and growth experimentation is involved in all of that, by the way. So you're helping push different materials, or you're thinking about what email notifications to send, or what the collateral itself looks like and how does it get the message across clearly. Or you're on more of the faster route where you're like, man, let's get them to the aha moment. Let's get them all excited and let's see how quickly they can start referring people.
That's really interesting. To your point about the nurture process, we use Gusto as for payroll. And I mean, I was shocked at the hand holding. I needed it, but I was very shocked at how much time everybody took. I think I spoke with maybe 3 people. There was an initial call, no selling there. There was a follow-up call. And then once you signed up, they still would just handhold you. And understandably so, you're talking about payroll and government and forms and all this type of stuff. So I got it, but it was just like, man, I recommend them to so I guess I'm in the, it worked. The experiment worked.
Right? So
I recommend it to everybody.
You're talking here about it on the podcast. You're like, I love the experience so much, even though it was.
Because whenever people, they're very nervous. Small business owners are very nervous about the payroll thing. It's like, I don't know, even you talking about the government. I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to check a wrong box. I need it all right. Like, it's just not something you're willing to wing it. And I think they know that, obviously. And that's why they do such a really phenomenal job of like hand holding.
100% agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps today's show. Thank you to our incredible guest, Hamlet Azarian, founder and CEO of Azarian Growth Agency. We'll have contact information for Hamlet in the show notes for anyone who wants to get in touch with questions or business inquiries. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and review. Thank you so much, Hamlet. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for having me on.